Good morning. Welcome to Deep South Dining right here on MPB Think Radio. It is a beautiful morning, Carol, and it is always good to see you. Like I haven't seen you in a few days.
I know, and Mal, I've missed you.
You've been out and about.
I have indeed, and in fact, I've been at my Murrah High School class reunion this weekend.
Wow. Which reunion?
I won't say.
Okay.
I won't say. But
well,
somebody's trying to tell you, but pay no attention
pay
to
no
those
attention.
hands. But I'll just have to say, at the Murrah High School class reunion, I happened to spot one of our cooking and coping members.
Just happened to be there.
Just happened to be there. He's kind of a celebrity on cooking and coping. Rusty Burwell, formerly of Jackson and now of
Stanardsville,
Virginia.
Standards.
Yeah.
Stanardsville.
Just north of Charlottesville.
Not standards.
No.
Stanners.
Yeah, Stanards.
Yes, we'll make sure we say it
I'll spell
in
it
the
for you.
proper Virginia way. And also saw Charlotte Duck Pelton, who is another one of our cooking and coping people.
Who's been
And
on the show.
She has. She stopped by, but it's really interesting because, going to high school with both of these guys and then reconnecting through food over the years. I hadn't seen Charlotte in many, many years, nor had I seen you. And I was trying to think how you came to cooking and coping, and I believe it was during the pandemic, just in the regular Facebook post. I saw you post a meal, and I commented, I said, please share this with us on cooking and coping, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Well, Rusty, we're glad you're here. For our listeners locally, you might note that Rusty is the brother of Jim Burwell, who was an entrepreneur and a restaurateur and a great friend and promoter of all things Jackson culture. I remember working with Jim on the Red Beans and Rice Festival, for example. But he had many restaurants. I don't know that we can list them all, but I know the last one was Mimi's in Fondren, where the barbecue place is now.
You might say that he created the Renaissance in Fondren.
He may have.
Because that was probably 12 years ago.
Right,
11 years
long ago.
Yeah.
In the old service station.
Exactly.
And Rusty,
next
you
to
were
his house.
actually in
Right, he could walk
business.
across the street. Right.
You and Jim had Lloyd's Kitchen back many years ago.
We did. We those that have been here a long time might remember that Mr. Lloyd had a smoked chicken place in a totem down below where
The Dutch Bar.
Well, down below the Dutch Bar, further down out North State Street,
Yep.
and down when it drops down to the flats down out there. And we found out, Jim and I were working together at Mississippi Federated Co-op.
Okay.
We were both in data processing, and we were trying to. Well, he was a serial entrepreneur. We were early in that, and he drugged me. Well, no, but we found out Mr. Lloyd wanted to retire because he was probably 90, and so we had loved his chickens, and we went down and talked to him, and he was interested, and so he let us have the business for renting it out and buying the equipment. But then within about 6 months, the Baileys had come to us, who were opening the real estate Baileys. And they were opening a little strip center in Meadowbrook,
Right.
and needed a restaurant in there. And they offered to make it easy for us to get in there. And so, and you'll appreciate this, Mal. I don't know if you ever went in there.
Many times.
Okay. Well,
Many times.
It was about 2,000 square feet, and half of it was kitchen.
That's right.
So 1,000 square foot kitchen, because it was catering. We knew that we could make a little more living in catering. So we had a big catering kitchen.
And that was the one that was closer to the Dutch Bar.
It was.
That's where I was coming.
Just straight down the street.
The one that y'all relocated to.
We did.
And how long did that go on?
Well,
Brothers in the restaurant business.
Well, that was till about 82, 83.
Okay.
I pulled out a year or so before he closed that and moved on. But in between, talk about serial entrepreneur, in between, we took over from Tay Broad.
yeah.
We
the
took over
catering
the
business.
the pallet.
Oh, you took over the pallet.
So we ran the pallet
In the Mississippi Museum of Art, yeah.
which expanded our catering business substantially. But we were there. In fact, she was tired of it. This was a lunch operation in the Mississippi Museum of Art. Is this still? They have some kind of cafe.
They have a cafe. It's currently not operating on a regular basis, but it is open for events.
Well, this was wonderful from a restaurateur standpoint because they had the facility, commercial kitchen. They had the docents as the waitresses.
I was a waitress.
Okay. And so managing volunteer waitresses is the whole thing. But it was lunch only. So it was limited, but then again, we were the caterer for the whole facility for all those. So we, it opened up a lot of things for us. And then we opened the food service at the Lamar Disco. When the Lamar Disco opened, they had come to us to run a luncheon.
I still have a copy of your menu.
Yeah.
Because, we moved the Lamar to Hal and Mal's.
Oh, did you?
At the very end, after the JRA took over the Lamar Theater and tore it down, we relocated that business, which was a 2-day-a-week business.
Yes.
It was Wednesdays and Saturdays.
Wow.
It was a college bar, and Wednesday night was like disco night, and then Saturday was live band, show bands. And we moved all of that over to the Hal and Mal's building until 1984 when the federal government changed the drinking age from 18 to 21.
Oh, yeah.
Did that have an impact?
A slight, as in we were out of business. We closed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting here. What do you know? We have 2 brothers with one restaurant and 2 brothers, Jim and Rusty, with another. It's a brother thing.
Yeah.
How did you cook at home?
Well, in the first place, Jim was a great cook and a passionate cook. And Linda, better than Jim. Linda's a great cook, and I think Linda, if she's listening, would nod if I said that she got that from her mother. Her mother was a great cook.
Linda was Linda Seal,
right.
and people in Jackson will remember Seal Lily ice cream, and and Joe Seal was our age.
Yeah, Joe was our age, but he was off at a military school, so I didn't get to know him till college.
He was my first boyfriend. I don't know if he knew it, but we lived very, very close together. But a little Jackson history here. But talk a little bit about the kind of things you cook on cooking and coping. There are a lot of meats.
Yes, exactly. Meat-centric. That's fair. I have been trying to do more vegetarian and have gotten a little better at that. But I think, for me, going back for a second, I was a young child compared to Jim and Linda, 6 years older than I, and they were the cooks, and I was the happy to do whatever. And so I learned to cook a lot at Lloyd's Kitchen and with the catering because we had to do so many varied things. But really, when I left and got a regular job, and I left, ended up at the Mississippi Lung Association, which I then had a 35-year career. So I made one move. But, suddenly I had a day job and didn't work weekends, Malcolm. It was odd.
Wow.
And but I was able to cook for myself. And so, but I knew the value of being passionate about it and that. And so I've always been a recipe cookbook. I mean, I can throw something together easily, but I get inspired by all the many cookbooks. I won't say how many I have, but I have too many.
Well, I've seen, I think you did an Anna Garden pot roast recently, and you've done a smothered chicken from Southern Living that was wonderful. But I love it that you source the cookbooks because, for a lot of people out there, see, my friend Malcolm, he can walk in a kitchen, look at the ingredients, and just throw together these amazing meals because he has one of the best taste memories of anybody. But the rest of us like cookbooks.
Well, there's a question.
Or need cookbooks.
Yeah.
Well, I need them for inspiration. And, I love to read them like a novel and get all excited and say, I want to make something like that.
Well, I for some reason I've always too, and to go back, I relate this to Primos Northgate. that you went in a Primos, or the mini Primoses, and you'd get an Asian dish or a Greek dish, or not many Greek dishes, but those Italian dish. They had one of everything, and I remember having chicken cacciatore, having no idea what it was or why, and then a few years later, that was in my early 20s. A few years later, I came across an Italian cookbook with chicken cacciatore, and I said, "Oh, that's not American," And so I got interested in trying to cook the original things, if you know what I mean. Classic. Yeah. So I like to cook a classic version before I do something different. And,
of course.
And I think that's something that's driven me to. I'll usually read 3 or 4 recipes of the same thing to find the essence of it, if you know what I mean. Before somebody starts putting in vanilla.
You're right.
Well, speaking of chicken cacciatore, one of my favorite dishes, it's chicken hunter style, the Italians call it. But I love it, but I don't want the green bell peppers in it. So if you eat my chicken cacciatore, it's going to have yellow and perhaps orange peppers. No green ones. Yeah. Just doesn't work for me. Yeah. So.
Well, it doesn't work for my wife, Bobby, either.
There you go.
I'll pull them right out.
Take them out of there.
And another one of your trademarks in cooking and coping, everything, it's one of your posts when you're just scrolling through because there's always a bottle of wine. And I zoom in on that first because I like to understand what you were thinking. Your wines are very thoughtful. I mean, you're really pairing wines with what, or is that's what it appears to be?
It is all appearance. We, my wife Bobby and I would say that we drink what we like. So having a hot dog with a nice Bordeaux, or having pasta with a nice Bordeaux, but we've gotten into wine. We lived in Seattle for 5 years in the late 80s, and it was a burgeoning wine country, and then we've been lucky enough to go to California and see that, and to France, and they're all wonderful. And the wine, and when you're in wine country, which is where I live now, Virginia, Central Virginia,
sure.
Central, they all feel the same. The food's good. People are taking an afternoon and having a nice lunch and a glass of wine, and that's the same in Provence or Tuscany or
the wines fit the food. The wines are created to go with the foods in that area, but I didn't realize that about Virginia.
Oh yeah. Up and coming. But to your point too, Carol, so the reason I put the recipe, a link to a recipe and the wine, and is because that's what I want to know.
Yeah.
So I just think, well, what would I want to know? And if I don't have the recipe as a link, I'll try to say it's got this and this and this and this, what's in it, and because that's what I want to know.
All right, we're going to take a break, and Rusty, if you're up for it, we'll ask you just to stick around. You're welcome to stay with us. We've got another guest coming in after the break, Jeff Mueller, who from the Rockin M Chuckwagon. Carol unearthed this gentleman, and we're so excited to have him on.
I love following people on cooking and coping, and I like his food too. So one day I clicked on his profile just to see where he was from, and here he's a Chuckwagon cook.
From Brandon.
Yeah.
Wow. So he's local.
Yeah, so who knew?
So we're excited. So we'll be right back with more Deep South Dining right here on MPB Think Radio with Rusty Burwell and our new friend, Jeff Mueller. We're going to talk about Chuckwagon one-pot cooking, and we're excited.
We are. Okay.
Yeah!
You don't want to miss the next Mississippi Antique Showcase coming to Oxford, Mississippi, May 2nd and 3rd.
For a $100 donation, you can get a showcase ticket, complimentary food, cocktails, and an on-site appraisal, or a chance to be on the show. Or for $60, you can just come and be part of the party. Call 1-844-874-6874, visit mpbonline.org, or scan the QR code on your screen.
We can't wait to see you in Oxford for the next Mississippi Antique Showcase.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bobby Rush. As a blues man, I love Mississippi Public Broadcasting. If you support Mississippi music and their local programming, donate now, right now, and become a member today, not tomorrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Doesn't matter how big or small, but we prefer big. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Desiree Frazier, host of the award-winning news program, Mississippi Edition. We bring you conversations about the latest news from across the Magnolia State. Whether it's politics, healthcare, or education, you'll hear in-depth discussions on issues that matter to you. So join us each weekday morning at 8:30 on MPB Think Radio, or download the podcast, listen through the app, and online.
Welcome back to Deep South Dining right here on MPB Think Radio. We are glad you're with us this morning. We got a studio full of folks we're excited to have here. We have Rusty Burwell of Stanardsville, Virginia, formerly of Jackson, grew up right here in the Bowl News City, the city with soul. And also from Brandon, one of our suburbs, we have Jeff Mueller here, who is an expert chuckwagon cook and a one-pot wonder, and we're excited to have you, Jeff. And Carol, you found Jeff out there in the internet world.
Yeah, I did. Jeff, I always like seeing what you're posting on cooking and coping. I did not know about the chuckwagon until I dug a little deeper. But, you and Rusty both, give us so much pleasure just looking at what you're doing in your regular kitchen.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you.
So you're located in Brandon, and tell us a little bit about how you got into this chuckwagon world.
Well, I've always loved cooking, and it's just something that's brought me a joy and relaxation, I guess you could say. And we just grew up cooking the whole time, and probably for the last 18 years or so, we've been cooking on the chuckwagon.
For 18 years?
For about 18 years, yes, sir.
So did you just one day say, I want to be a chuckwagon cook, or did you go to a chuckwagon event and say,
Well, I knew a chuckwagon events around, and now Kent Rollins, who's a very well-known chuckwagon cook in the country, is now a really good friend of mine. But when I thought about going into this type of cooking, I signed up for one of his cooking schools, which was a 4-day cooking school out in the middle of nowhere. You set up a chuckwagon and you lived the way they did back then, and you cooked. And since then, it's just grew on me, and it's been a big part of my life ever since.
Wow. And the wagon itself, you and I were visiting a little bit earlier. Tell our listeners where you found the wagon and what kind of wagon it is and how it's set up.
Okay. It is a 1894 Peter Shuttler, and we found the wagon through Jim Doyle, who is a gentleman in Lawton, Oklahoma. We called him and told him we were looking for a wagon, and he found this wagon. The axles and the running gear of the wagon are original. We didn't restore it. We preserved it. But I like the patina and the look of the way it was, and we just kept it that way. And the chuck box, which is actually my kitchen, that's my cabinets and my table, my countertop.
And you pull it out of the wagon onto the ground, right?
No, it stays in the wagon all the time.
Stays in the wagon, okay.
So what vintage, when you say that they were original, the wheels and axles, like how old would that be?
1894.
Wow.
Been a minute.
They're 1894.
And they didn't call them food trucks back then?
No, sir. and the food that we cook on chuck wagons today is completely different than the food cooked back in the cattle drive eras. Y'all would not like the food that was cooked back then. It was biscuits and beans and dried meat and dried fruit and limited spices.
Right.
And I credit those guys back in the day the cooks, the cookies as they were called, at being creative and how to make beans different for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Right. And so, for our listeners, I don't think anyone listening can't recall a movie or a TV show where they've seen the Chuckwagon implemented. I guess it sort of went out of service around what time, would you say, Jeff?
They're still being used today.
Mm-hmm.
There's still big ranches in the West that use chuck wagons. They don't have to use them, but they still try to carry on the tradition of those wagons. I would probably say that they're early 1900s, pre-1920, chuck wagons started getting out of use for the purpose that they were in the late 1800s.
Well, I was watching Yellowstone, which I'm sure most of us have seen, and there was quite a chuck wagon in it, and a cookie played a prominent role in their moving the cattle around and providing the food for them. But that's the most contemporary look at a chuck wagon that I've seen.
Let's go back and talk about the chuck box. I guess when you and I talked on the phone yesterday, I was envisioning something that you pulled off the wagon and used as a countertop.
No, ma'am. You take the tailboard out of the wagon, the tailgate. I mean, just think of it as a pickup bed.
Right.
Okay, you take the tailgate out and you build a chuck box in there. The lid folds down and creates your workspace, and that's where you work. And the chuck box was built by the cook out of what back then in the day, it was built by whatever he could find, whatever spare lumber. Did he have drawers? There's pictures, but really it was made of what he could find and to his liking. And so when I built my chuck box, I built it all out of good hard wood. I used copper that came from my father-in-law. I used knobs that came from a house that my parents lived in. And it's got trim work, which is kind of unusual for a chuck box, but it's got some trim work that were bed slats in my great-grandfather's bed.
Wow.
And so the chuck box, being that it's 20 years old, let's say, it still has some history that I can talk about. While I talk about the wagon, I can still talk about the chuck box.
I'm sort of surprised that it didn't come with a chuck box.
Most Peter Shuttler in the later years of their business and a couple other manufacturers built chuck boxes. But originally they had to take a covered wagon basically and utilize it to cook.
And what is the wagon covered with?
The wagon has a canvas top, just like a general covered wagon would have.
Right.
Typically that was used some, but the chuck wagon was carried typically all the bedrolls and all the stuff for all the cowboys went in there. Typically it didn't have a seat. It was much easier on the cook to sit on these padded bedrolls that were 2 foot thick when they were stacked in there than it was sitting on a board seat bouncing across the prairie. But the chuck wagon was used for that. It had to carry all the supplies, I'm going to say for 2 to 3 weeks, because it was a long way for them to get close to where they could restock.
Well, one thing that really captured my imagination about your chuck wagon is you are doing way more than the typical chuck wagon cooking. I mean, you're doing some fine dining meals out of the chuck wagon. So tell us a little bit about the type of events you do for people and how you've distinguished yourself in this way.
Yeah, there's multiple types of people that cook on chuck wagons. I kind of separate myself from all of those because I want people to come up to my chuck wagon and eat something or see something that they go, wow, you prepared that on a fire? And I like doing that. When they come to a chuck wagon and they get creme brulee that's cooked on a fire outside in the middle of nowhere, I mean, that's kind of a shock and awe, kind of. But I've kind of separated myself into more of a, I ain't gonna say fine dining, but improved meal on a chuck wagon, from appetizers to entree to, a couple desserts, depending on the event.
So Jeff, how, as a cook, what tools have you got? I mean, is it you have a stove? You
got a fire, right?
Well, typically a fire. Now, I have a metal box, which is used as my stove. It's 2 foot by 4 foot. and I build my fire inside that box. That's not traditional, but when you're cooking the way I cook, and people are walking up to enjoy that event, they don't want smoke and ashes, and they don't want all of this flying all over everywhere. It also helps me contain the fire so that in dry, environments, I don't have to worry about my fire spreading or an ash blowing, But that is my heat source. Now, typically, most of what I cook is cooked in the Dutch oven. So I open the door on the stove and get a shovel full of coals, and I go to the Dutch oven.
Right. Wow. Tell us some traditional Chuckwagon meals and recipes, and then tell us some of the stuff that you're doing that's different.
Well, I think traditionally the one-pot meals were something that was done back then. In the late 1800s, again, the ingredients were very limited. They had biscuits and beans and dried meat and dried fruits, and the cook had to be real creative how to make sourdough biscuits into a dessert or into a breakfast. I mean, they had to be that way. Now, later on, the early 1900s, obviously food got a little better. You did have some canned goods and some things that you could carry with you, but they didn't have refrigeration. Right. And meat, on the cattle drive era, meat was something, unless the cowboy killed a turkey or a snake or something like that, you didn't have it. You didn't kill the cattle because that's what you were hauling to market. Right. So you didn't want to do that. But today, there's a lot of different cooks. We've got a lot of guys that do chicken and dumplings, they do chilies, they do stews, they do things like that. For me, I like to do something completely different. It's not unusual for me to do a risotto or or
Chuckwagon risotto.
Or something like that on a Chuckwagon, or use meats that are completely different and not common, not beef and not chicken and not pork, but to try to find some some meat that's a protein that's you wouldn't expect to find cooked on a fire.
For example?
Well, we've done kangaroo. We've done alpaca. We've done some various meats. There's some websites that can get you some exotic meat, and depending on the event and what we're doing, we'll reach out there and get some stuff like that. But it's also cuts of meat that may not be enjoyable to some folks. Of course, we're down south. Chicken gizzards is something we probably all have had. Mm-hmm. But, when you prepare chicken gizzards or sweetbreads, or you go into that type of cuts of meat, liver, heart, people, it turns them off just to think about it. Yeah, it can be
a little squeamish.
Well, it depends on how you prepare it.
Yeah.
It depends on how you prepare it.
So does the wagon have any power, or is it all au naturel?
All natural.
All right.
2 hands.
2 hands.
That's it. No power, no lights. We have a lantern that we use for light if we need to in the dark.
But if you do a catering, if someone says, I want you to bring the Chuckwagon to my house, you still go with all natural,
traditional all the way. Even though we're not a traditional Chuckwagon cook, we use the methods of cooking back then, the heat source, the all that. We use that to prepare the meal that they would like. And I try to tailor the meal to their likings. Okay, I'm not a big Italian cook, so if they ask me to do something real Italian, it might not be good for me, but I try to cook them what they would like, especially if it's a kid's birthday. Right. What's their favorite meal? How do you want to do this?
So how do you do pizza?
Pizza we do in a Dutch oven, and we do it in the bottom of a Dutch oven. You got to think of a Dutch oven as the oven in your house. Okay, all the coals do is they heat up the air.
This is a cast iron
yes, ma'am.
oven.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. I brought some pictures.
All right.
We love a show and tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll hold it up for the what size is this?
That's a 10, I believe, in those pictures.
A 10 quart?
No, it's called a number. It's a number 10 Dutch oven. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
It's going to measure about 11 inches in diameter. But it's completely different than the Dutch oven that you would use in your house. Yeah. The enameled Dutch oven is still cast iron, but it's enameled. It has a lip around the top, and that lip is to hold the coals up on top of the lid.
On top of it. So you get heat from both directions.
Yes. Yeah. And you want to heat the air. You can cook literally anything that you can cook in the oven in there. You just got to be real careful on how you operate the high and low knob.
What's the biggest disaster you've ever had cooking out like this?
Tell it.
Burning your food.
Yeah, there you go.
You can put stuff in the Dutch oven and people can come up and talk to you and get to talking about the wagon, and that's my interest. So I kind of go that way. And all of a sudden, if you smell, if you smell what you're cooking in that Dutch oven, it's done.
It's over.
Right? And that's probably the biggest. You have to be prepared for that type of scenario. You have to have a backup plan. You have to have something extra you're carrying with you that you can.
That's when you get out
void.
the can of beans.
That's
correct. Now, you brought some items here. I would love for you to tell us about these.
Well, the first one is, and again, things aren't necessarily period correct, because what period are we talking about? The 1880s, or are we talking about the 1900s? I have several of those, and that's what I use as my canisters.
And this is a
cream can.
This a cream can with a handle. Is that made out of aluminum?
This one is aluminum, and that's where you get into the period thing. Did they have that in 1880 or did they have that in 1910? I don't know, but it's old. And but this is what we use for canisters. We have some steel cream cans we use for flour, and they're bigger. And that probably the most utility item that I brought is a hash knife.
Let's get this guy in here.
This is the Chuckwagon's. That's his cook's most handiest tool. It's a chopper, it's a knife, it's a dicer, it's a spatula, it's a scoop. It can be used for whatever.
Well, in Italy, you would have a mezzaluna. I mean, I think every culture has its version of this. And Rusty, we could also use this for a bench scraper.
It would.
To scrape.
It'd be perfect.
It is. And when you're chopping up something on a cutting board, you usually just take that and you scoop it up and you put it in whatever you're cooking. Most common things around here are an ulu, which is an Alaskan knife. It typically has points on the end of the blade instead of being flat.
Right.
And that's kind of the main difference.
And do you, Jeff? So with the fire side of this, like a barbecue operation, you got to get there early.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
what's the time frame?
Usually 4 hours. I need to be set up and ready to start cooking 4 hours before the event.
Wow.
Because depending on the size of the event or the menu that you're cooking, say you're doing 2 appetizers, an entree, 3 sides, and 2 desserts. Okay, you've got to time all of that.
I would say.
Because you don't really have a good way to hold that food. So you have to, maybe start off early with something, I'm just going to say green beans, for example, that you can par cook, take them off the fire, let them sit there for a minute, and then you can put them on to finish them right before you're ready. But it's the timing of all of those things that's the time required.
Now, I'm going to follow up on Rusty's fire question. You build a fire when you first get there, and you have to manage that fire throughout the entire event, or you'll lose your heat source.
That's correct.
So how often do you rebuild, add to, stoke, replenish your fire, or is it one continuous fire that you just manage?
The box that I use, the stove, I'm going to call it now, that my stove has a name. Her name is Sarah.
Oh, Sarah.
Okay.
Ooh.
We have, and
Sweet Sarah.
we just have her out there. I don't know how we came up with that name. My wife or somebody came up with that one, but it has a door on each end. So I put wood in one end. I'm taking coals out of the other. So when I put wood in, I kind of push the coals over. So it's kind of like a train of fire that's going through here. Also, by doing that, you create a hot side of your stove and a cooler side of your stove. But every time I take coals out to coal up a Dutch oven, I refuel my fire.
So you might do it 5 or 6 times during a meal?
Oh,
or?
at least.
At least.
At least.
What kind of wood are you using?
I use oak. I'm a oak cook. I don't. That's my go-to wood. Usually white oak.
You have a oak supplier, or
Yes,
do you
sir.
go
Yes,
searching
sir.
for it?
No, I have a guy that'll bring it to me. But that's that's the biggest thing, is whether or not who you're going to cook for can provide you that wood, or you've got to haul that wood. It's not unlikely for me to put a pickup load of wood in the back of my pickup when I go somewhere, because they don't have any wood, or they don't realize the amount of wood that it's going to take to cook.
Now, are we talking a cord of wood or a pickup truck load?
A pickup truck load, even with the bed, usually will get me through a good meal for 35 people or so.
Wow.
Wow.
Goodness.
And you carry all that wood.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, how does one get the chuck wagon? I guess you don't have horses in your barn to pull it down the interstate. No. So how are we going to get the chuck wagon?
I have an enclosed trailer, which is a car hauler. And a lot of car enthusiasts use these trailers. I have that. I have a winch in the front because I'm an old man, so I've got to have easy way to load it. I have a winch in the front, and I pull my wagon. That's my storage building. That's my transportation, and everything is inside the trailer.
And your wood holder.
Well,
where's the wood?
The wood goes in the pickup. The wood goes in the pickup.
So, but the question I have is, but the wagon was built to be pulled by animals.
Yes.
I don't know if it was oxen or horses or mules or what. But
and I wish that wagon.
You still have that?
Yes.
All that.
We still have everything except for the leather harnesses.
The rigging.
I don't have the leather harnesses, but I still have everything else in order to pull it. I don't pull mine. I've been asked to do that in some parades.
Yeah.
I don't do that anymore because my wagon is original. I don't want to break anything or tear anything up.
No potholes.
That would damage that. So.
Couldn't be in our parade.
Although, you say that. You think about the terrain these wagons went over.
Right.
The weather conditions they had to go through. They were some pretty well-built machines.
Yeah.
The engineering was...
But they had the stuff they need to fix them, too.
That's correct.
Right there.
That's
had the blacksmith with them.
No, they didn't usually have a blacksmith.
Oh, they didn't have
was
that?
Was Cookie the blacksmith?
He was the doctor. He was everything. Typically,
probably pulled a few teeth.
Yeah. Typically, he was the second in command in the cattle drive days. He was the second in command. He would cook breakfast and usually go to where they were going to camp at night. Back in the 1880s or so, they didn't really do lunch.
Right.
It was just a morning meal and an evening.
And that morning meal, if someone talks to me about a chuck wagon or brings up a chuck wagon, I think about the coffee pot on the open fire and everybody sitting around with their tin cup.
Kind of thick.
Very thick.
Kind of thick.
Yeah, drinking it right down to that last bit and then tossing it on the fire. I mean, I don't know. That's just where my brain goes.
Coffee is a staple of the wagon. We try to have, depending on the size of the group, we might have 4 gallons of coffee available. How to do that. Now, coffee, we don't have a percolator. We don't have a coffee maker or anything like that. We use water, coffee grounds, and the heat. That's how we make it.
So you make the coffee.
We boil the coffee inside the coffee pot.
There you go.
And then
that's what I'm studying on there, Rusty.
And actually, the longer you say you boil your coffee for somewhere around 2 to 3, 4 minutes, something like that, it's hotter than the coffee makers that we have today. The coffee's not as bitter, and you'll see a little sheen that'll come up on top of your coffee, and that's all the acids and stuff. I have people that drink cowboy coffee.
Right.
That say they don't get indigestion from the coffee. It tastes a lot smoother, and it's because of the heat. You get to a good, real hard rolling boil.
Yeah. Most coffee makers are at 202 degrees.
Yeah, and we want to see the top of that pot rolling.
Yeah, you're rolling. You're rolling boiling.
Yes, ma'am.
Our guest today is Jeff Mueller from Rockin M Chuckwagon, as well as our friend Rusty Burwell's in the studio with us today. Rusty's native of Jackson, now living in Virginia, and is in town for a class reunion.
Yeah,
you and Carol were in the same class.
Our 30th high school
30th.
reunion.
Yeah,
I believe that.
Right.
It's our 30th. That's right.
So, Jeff, we were speaking a little earlier before the rest of you got here, and you told me a story that really touched me. You said that you had a stroke a few years ago, and you think it's this chuck wagon and this work that you do around the chuck wagon that really helped you to rehab from that. Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, cooking is something that's a good relaxation for me. After my stroke, I was in a wheelchair, and I'm sure
you are kidding.
My wife could tell you multiple horror stories. Okay, but the first thing I wanted to do was cook. Okay, well, I couldn't stand up in the kitchen. I had to figure out, how to cook. And I got to where I could stand up, I could cook. And I started coffee. It was the first thing I started making, cowboy coffee every morning. Okay, and then I got to where we could go further. I couldn't set my wagon up, after the first year or so. And then we got to where I could do it with help. And now I can do it today by myself.
Wow.
And that drive,
That's a great story because it's unbelievable to think that you've had a stroke, seeing you walking around and
And how long was
doing.
that? rehab from stroke to being able to set up the wagon?
Probably 2.5 years.
Okay.
Something like that. I've got a real good friend, Kent Rollins. He has a YouTube channel, and I would watch him cooking on his wagon, and just that inspiration to want to go out there and do it myself. I think that had a big part of it.
And you have a YouTube channel.
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit, tell our listeners where they can go and find you and sort of follow what you do.
Well, it's Jeff Mueller on YouTube, and it's very unprofessional videos. They're not edited very much at all. They're just in my backyard, or they're on my wagon, or sometimes they're in the kitchen. And we just talk about what we're cooking. What I do a lot of times in those videos is I try to take, and I was listening to y'all earlier about cooking to the recipe. Okay, well, I'll find a recipe that's intriguing to me. I'll cook it in the house. And then I'll figure out, how do I make that recipe mine? And then I want to take it outside to where I don't have 350 on my oven knob. I don't have all of these things. And I want to get to where I can cook it outside. And that's what I try to do in my YouTube videos, is show you how to take something you're used to cooking in your house and take it to the outside and cook it out there over fire.
Yeah. We've got a caller today. Orain is calling, has a question about old-timey open fire cooking. What's going on, Orain?
Yes, I wanted to find out. I've listened to everything that has been explained about cooking the old-fashioned way, the Chuckwagon way. But is there any appreciation for the massive amount of work it takes to produce the food that's being discussed? And the other question is, has he ever done any goat meat, curried goat, for example? I'll hang up and listen.
Well, thanks for calling, Orain, calling in from South Haven. A couple of really cool questions. Jeff, what's your response?
The meat's the easiest one. Yes, I've done goat. I've done lamb. I've done various of those depending on the event. I like lamb cooked outside. To me, it's not as gamey as it's cooked inside an oven. I mean, there's something about smoke, and to me, it's a different kind of heat. When you heat your oven to 350 with gas or electric, or you're heating it with wood, to me, it's just a different heat. I can't explain that, but it just seems to work its magic. And I didn't understand his first question. He's talking about the work.
I think he was saying a level of appreciation for how much work it takes to do the kind of old-fashioned cooking that you're doing versus modern cooking.
Yeah, everybody comments on that. That, man, you work so hard, or you do this. Well, when you love what you do, they always say it's never work. And I enjoy it. Yeah, I get hot and I get tired, but it's something that I enjoy. It's a relaxation.
Yeah, when I go and I turn the knob up to 350, I don't get winded. It's
how much wood did it take to get that knob to 350?
I know stuff happened before I turned the knob, but I'm not sure what all happened.
Hey, Marissa, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Marissa's been on vacation. She went on a cruise. I want to know what you ate, if you found anything interesting on your cruise to eat that you can report out on.
I was hoping you'd ask me this question. Cruise. I've been on a few cruises, and the food is always my favorite part.
Okay.
Because there's something about having it all paid for up front, and you can try things that you're not sure if you like or not. And I actually, on this cruise, there's one particular thing stood out to me, and I got to give a shout out to Joe Sherman, because he was on the show a few months back, and he was talking about making copycat tuna crudo.
Right.
And I'd never had that before, and the words scared me, but they had it as an appetizer on the cruise, and I got to try it.
And
I liked it. It was good. Is it always spicy?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes. I liked it, but I was like, huh.
Well, good. All right. That's
our
producer, Marissa Vaughn, who's returned from her cruising about the Gulf. Where did you go? You went down into Mexico and Belize?
We were in Mexico and Belize, Cozumel, Costa Maya, Belize.
Did you tune into Radio Cancun? I love when I'm down there, which I haven't been in a long time. I used to love to listen to the local radio stations.
I bet that was a blast.
It was. So, Rusty, do you do much open fire grilling, smoking, cooking? Not maybe as old timey as this fashion, but our modern day version.
Yeah, not as much as I used to. Of course, I used to be in the smoke food business.
Yes.
And but I went through a cycle when we moved from New Jersey. In New Jersey, there's snow.
Yes, I've heard that.
And so I learned that I needed to shovel out to the grill first, and to get the snow out of the way. But I haven't cooked as much. We had a cycle where we were out of the house for a year or so building a house, and then another year before I got a grill. And so I haven't been grilling as much as I said. But I have been listening to Deep South Dining. So I have an air fryer.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I took one for the team
Now.
and got one here.
Well,
Yep,
more
yep.
importantly, I should make a donation in y'all's name for my flusser.
Ah,
So I'm very
Flusser.
happy, and I have spread flussers all throughout Central Virginia.
Excellent. And for the listeners who don't have a flusser is it's the FL for flusser. It's a flat juicer.
That's right.
Juicer.
And you know how juicers are hard to store, but this is flat, and you open it and then
Hold it up.
squeeze your fruit. And to me, it's the best. Rusty, what do you?
It is. I mean, I've gone through. I've had a lot of those cast iron lemon and lime.
Yeah.
Squeezer.
things, and I broke 3 of them.
Yeah.
'Cause
And
I
they
was
don't
getting that
really
last
get it
juice
all
of the
out.
lime.
Yeah.
No, and then I finally got an aluminum one that was really good. But as soon as I heard you talking about the flusser, the thing I like about it, of course, it works perfectly. It's the best one I've ever had juicing, but it's flat. So it goes
Easy
in the
to store.
drawer better.
I can tell that Jeff is going to run right home and order
most
order a flusser.
Jeff, do you use fresh fruits? Do you do much juicing? If you do, this thing is.
We don't do juicing.
Well,
But
do you like it at
use,
home?
We use fresh fruit.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
Okay, well, you may not be a
gotta-
candidate
well, I
for a
don't know.
juice for
I
a
don't know.
flusser.
You know, I'm so used to doing things without appliances.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, that a hand mixer, the little hand crank mixer, that's my
That's your
more,
style.
Yeah, that's what it is.
So
And
do
that's
you?
what I like.
And so do you have one knife?
I
two?
have a set of knives.
You do.
Okay.
You have a set. I was
I
thinking
use and it's a modern day chef set
Oh,
of
yeah.
knives.
Yeah.
Okay, the hash knife predominantly I use a lot, but depending on what you're cutting, you know, sometimes you need a longer blade. You need something that's serrated. You know, you need something like that.
Cookie on the Chuckwagon may not have had a whole lot of knives.
No, he
but
probably
there's-
had one.
Yeah, we're modern
one and a
modern
scabbard.
people.
A little bit.
You know,
a little bit.
I enjoyed on your YouTube channel seeing some dinners that you did in Alabama. I think the name was Sullivan
Creek Ranch.
And they were just these beautiful, fine dinners. They put the table out in the field.
Well, I have to give Greg and Emily, who are their owners of Sullivan Creek Ranch, credit for that. They came up with a dinner on the trail, and they have a phrase called rustic refinement that I've kind of captured,
Which
and used
describes
that.
your cooking.
And so I would set up a chuck wagon in the pasture, and then Emily and her group would set up white tablecloths with china and everything outside of my dining fly, and we would prepare a meal traditionally on the chuck wagon and serve those. And most of those were a couple of appetizers, an entree, probably 3 sides, and a couple of desserts. You know, but it was a very unique experience, and we've done a few of those since then, and it's really been a big hit.
What's a dining fly? You said that so quickly.
It's my canopy or my tent.
Oh,
whatever
that comes
you wanna
out over
call
the
it.
cooking
Comes out over
area.
the top.
And it
I-
comes off of the wagon?
No, I have one designed for that. It's probably, mine is 16 by 24, I think. Okay, so it's relatively large, but if it's raining or the weather's bad, I have the ability to put sides up in that. So it's like a military style tent, you know, a side tent. And that's how I protect myself when the weather's bad.
Gotcha.
But,
Makes sense.
yeah. And
Okay.
back in the day, it was the fly over the wagon. A lot of times was turned to give the cook just 3 or 4 feet of shade, you know.
I have a question about something I saw you do on Cooking and Coping. Deep fried bacon. It looked delicious. You have it says it's battered with flour, cornstarch, cornmeal, black pepper, garlic, and do you do it
basically-
on the Chuckwagon too?
Yes, ma'am. It's basically a chicken fried bacon. A restaurant. I grew up in Texas, and we had a restaurant not far from where I lived that had this on their menu. Well, I don't like taking someone's recipe and just cooking that recipe. I want to make it my own. So I tweaked the batter to make it like this, adding a little cornmeal, added some texture to the batter. But it's a really big hit.
And you serve it with maple syrup. I mean,
Yes, ma'am.
What can be better?
Usually a bourbon maple syrup.
And is it much of a batter? I mean, a thick batter?
No, it's
or
really
just
thin.
Okay.
It's thin. I'm going to say, maybe 1/8 of an inch thick is about all you
Now,
want.
do you deep fry it, drop it in oil, or put it on a griddle?
I deep fry it.
Oh, wow.
I drop it right off in a Dutch oven full of oil.
Would you be able to do that in the next couple of hours?
Beautiful.
In the parking lot, because I can stay.
Yeah, well.
I know. I'm passing a picture.
Carol's
to
got a
Rusty.
photo of the deep fried bacon here.
Oh my Lord!
It looks good.
You know, I flagged that when you did it. I mean, it just, it's something you can dream about at night. And just the thought of the pepper and the garlic.
Well, back in the day, they had to make good use of what they carried with them. We still have to do that today. I mean, when I drive 4 to 6 hours to go cook for somebody, I'm limited on the supplies that I have.
Right.
And so I have to figure out a way, how can I use bacon 2 or 3 different ways to get use out of it.
You got a favorite bacon, Jeff?
I like a good hickory bacon, good thick sliced hickory cut
You do
bacon.
the thick.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners where they can find you if someone is curious about what you do and they might want to
Or in the mood for a chuck wagon.
or some deep fried bacon.
Well, when we set up all of our things, we didn't do a very good job about being uniform with what we call them, but I'm at Jeffrey Mueller at Facebook.com.
Okay.
And I can go out there.
And Mueller
That's
is Mueller.
Yeah, and Jeffrey is Rey, Jeffrey.
Rey. Are you German? What is Mueller?
I have German in my father was adopted by a German family, so
Interesting.
That's how we got that going.
Wow.
But yes.
Well, we've run completely out of time, but it sure has been fun, and we thank you for listening, for joining us today. Deep South Dining is a production of Mississippi Public Broadcasting's Think Radio. We are funded by the generous contributions from listeners like yourself, and we thank you. Our show was produced by Marissa Vaughn, who's been out cruising. For our special guests, Rusty Burwell and Jeffrey Mueller, and my co-host, Carol Palmer, we thank you. I am Malcolm White. We ask that you now stay tuned for Marshall Ramsey's program, Now You're Talking, followed by Southern Remedy at 11. And please join us next Monday and every Monday morning at 9 a.m. for more Deep South Dining. We're also on Sunday mornings at 9, Carol, and we can be podcast anywhere,
anytime.
We'd love to have you. This show is heard exclusively on MPB Think Radio. We'll see you next week.
This forecast is underwritten by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Mississippi.